The activities of authoritative criminals are not always associated only with murders and robberies. Some of them, unfortunately, think well with their heads and organize economic fraud on a global scale. To our joy, there are few such smart criminals, but even these rare characters cause enormous harm with their criminal activities in almost all corners of the world. The most famous of these leaders of the criminal world is the hero of our plot. It is not for nothing that the most influential law enforcement organizations on the planet are catching him, but they have not been able to catch him, much less imprison him, for many decades. The FBI calls this cunning criminal the most dangerous Russian on the planet, the boss of bosses of the Russian-Ukrainian mafia. The Federal Bureau of Investigation even gave him the nickname Don Simeon, thereby drawing an analogy with the famous character of the novel The Godfather, Don Corleone. At one time, he was even placed on the list of the most raped criminals on the planet, and in an honorable third place. After the terrorists Osama bin Laden and his deputy Ayman Zawahiri. The American government promised from $100,000 to $5 million for his capture, but no one dared to try to earn this big money. And no wonder, in European newspapers every now and then there appear chilling publications about the Hungarian pitchforks of the most powerful Russian mafioso converted into torture chambers. There, his henchmen allegedly cut into pieces businessmen who refused to pay tribute to the Russian mafia. In April 2013, this elusive leader of Russian organized crime was included in the ranking of the 500 most influential people in the world, compiled by the American magazine Forage Policy. Today, the fortune of this influential criminal is about $10 to $12 billion. So we will talk about Semyon Mogilevich, born in 1946. The future genius of crime was born in the capital of the Ukrainian SSR. When we said a little higher that no one could fail to catch and imprison this seasoned criminal, it was not entirely correct. Mogilevich still managed to be put in the dock and sent to jail twice, and this happened under the USSR, where he was first imprisoned for currency transactions in 1974, for 3 years. And then in 1977 he was arrested again and given a 4-year sentence, this time for fraud. After his second imprisonment, Mogilevich emerged as a seasoned criminal who knew the price of freedom and became completely immersed in economic crimes. According to intelligence services, Mogilevich's criminal activities reached a special scale in the dashing 90s, then Semyon moved to live in Moscow and acquired citizenship of the Russian Federation. In Russia, Semyon was able to establish contacts in Solntsevskaya, Orakhovskaya, Kurganskaya, Tambovskaya and other organized crime groups. He established friendly relations with such authoritative leaders of criminal groups as Mikas and Avera, leaders of the Solntsevskaya organized crime group. In addition, Mogilevich began to collaborate with an influential Moscow businessman, Otarik Vantrishvili, and thief-in-law Vyacheslav Ivankov, Yapankik. To conduct his criminal activities more productively, Semyon Mogilevich acquired security from Afghan veterans who served him faithfully. In 1990, he left for Israel, where he received citizenship, and a year later Mogilevich married a Hungarian woman and moved to live in Budapest, where his most fruitful work began. He managed to organize drug trafficking to Eastern Europe, which is still considered the most powerful on the continent. To do this, he even specifically purchased, for millions of dollars in cash, a bankrupt airline in the former Soviet Central Asian Republic to transport heroin directly from Afghanistan. According to the FBI, the Mogilevich clan controls all drug traffickers exporting goods through the country's main gate, Sheremetyevo Airport. In addition, Mogilevich was able to take over the organization of income from the export of prostitution. Fortunately, after the collapse of the USSR, many beautiful girls rushed to work in Europe, which was waiting for beautiful Slavic bodies. Almost all brothels in Hungary and the Czech Republic are under the control of the Mogilevich Group, in close collaboration with the international branch of the Solntsevskaya organized crime group. But perhaps Mogilevich's aerobatics in organizing criminal enterprises were fully demonstrated when he began buying up Hungarian defense industry corporations, which shocked Interpol and the FBI. To the horror of the intelligence services, the transactions were completely legal. The brainy leader of Russian organized crime used Hungary's privatization law. Thus, the boss of the Russian mafia acquired the company's Magnex for the production of magnets and General Machine Works for the production of artillery shells, mortars, and launchers. In addition, according to the FBI, 95% of the Army co-op enterprise, the production of mortars, anti-aircraft guns, and launchers for Rotet-class ground-to-air, also belongs to Mogilevich. Already in 1994, Mogilevich acquired a license to sell weapons, and weapons from his enterprises flowed to all corners of the planet. American intelligence services rang the bell that the company Aragon Ltd., owned by Majlevich, sold Iraq 12 armored vehicles and a batch of surface-to-air missiles worth $20 million. In addition, the FBI announced Mogilevich's connections with international terrorist number 1, Osama bin Laden, to whom the Russian mafia, under the intelligence of the special services, was going to sell enriched uranium, and the medium even reported that Mogilevich was already selling nuclear materials and weapons to Iran. The entrepreneur himself categorically denied any connections with Arabs. He referred to the fact that this contradicts his Judaism, and called such accusations an attempt to demonize him. However, Mogilevich always denied any accusations against him. This was in his style. According to CNN, the FBI leadership characterizes Mogilevich as one of the most powerful gangsters in history. In the US, the boss of bosses is suspected of money laundering, fraud and racketeering. The most scandalous case was the case of YBM Magnex. According to investigators, Mogilevich registered this company for the production of magnets in 1994 in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia. Officially, the two Ludmilas were major shareholders of the company. The wife of Sergei Mikhailov, Mikhasia, and the wife of Viktor Averin, Aver the Elder, are both leaders of the Solntsevskaya organized crime group. The company received income from the sale of non-existent shares, a non-existent company on the Canadian stock market, that is, it was engaged in real money laundering. On May 31, 1999, a criminal case was opened in the United States against the management of YBM Magnex. As soon as there was a smell of arrests, Mogilevich and his associates successfully moved from the States, Canada, and Europe to Russia, and they did it for good reason. Mogilevich was later put on the international wanted list. If Semyon had been arrested, he could have faced a prison sentence of almost 400 years and a $17 million fine in the United States. Many Western publications claim that Semyon Mogilevich works closely with intelligence services such as the German Federal Intelligence Service, the BND, and the Hungarian police. In fact, it is not clear who works for whom in this cooperation. Western European journalists claim, it is believed that Mogilevich shares valuable information with these intelligence services, thus killing two birds with one stone, receiving his own immunity from a criminal investigation in Europe, and at the same time through the hands of Western intelligence agencies eliminate their competitors. And here the story of the investigation by Western journalists into the connection between Semyon Mogilevich and Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban is worth special mention. Many people associate the current Prime Minister of Hungary's love for Russia with the boss of the Russian mafia. In January 2008, Mogilevich was arrested in Russia, as many believe on a flimsy pretext, allegedly for tax evasion, but in reality everything was much more complicated. For almost a year and a half, Mogilevich was kept under arrest while the hearing on the case was going on, and suddenly, unexpectedly, in July 2009 he was released, and a little later all charges were dropped and the case against him was closed. Journalists managed to find out that the reason for the Kremlin's sudden loyalty to the crime boss was the latter's possession of video compromising material on Orban. Suffice it to remember that when party leader Viktor Orban was first elected to the post of prime minister in 1998, he, unlike his predecessors, avoided visits to Moscow and often criticized Russia, especially after Vladimir Putin came to power. Let's say in 2007, Orban, at that time in the status of the leader of the largest opposition party, harshly criticized the current government for being blind to Russia's growing influence on Hungary through its energy resources. In 2008, he further criticized the Kremlin, calling other European governments Putin's puppets, and the previous head of government's support for the South Stream project a national betrayal. And suddenly in 2009 everything changed dramatically. Somehow it coincided that in November, literally a couple of months after Mogilevich's release from Moscow prison, Orban unexpectedly came to St. Petersburg, to the United Russia Congress, where he met Putin. After this, Orban absolutely stopped criticizing Russia and Putin and, on the contrary, became one of the key supporters of the Russian president in Europe. So what happened to Orban during this period? In fact, the plot of this story began to develop much earlier, back in the mid-1990s, and it became known thanks to the German journalist Jürgen Roth, who managed to get businessman Dietmar Claude talking. Subsequently, the revelations of the Hungarian businessman were again included in the books of Jürgen Roth, Dirty Democracy. Dietmar Claude also gave an interview to the Austrian TV channel OR, where he told interesting details of his life. Claude said that he was the owner of the private security company SAS, met Mogilevich in Budapest and they began a trusting relationship, partly because both were Jews. Thanks to these trusting relationships, from 1993 to 1997, Mogilevich instructed him to transfer money to various persons. Claude received all these people in his house at Magi Utca 19, in the 3rd district of Budapest. In many of those to whom money was transferred, Claude recognized various influential people of the country. By the way, among them was the current Minister of the Interior, Sandor Pinter, who at that time held a senior position in the police. Claude handed out envelopes containing 10,000 German marks to all these people. One time it was in the spring of 1994, shortly before the parliamentary elections. Mogilevich's translator brought Dietmar Claude a suitcase containing 1 million German marks. Dietmar was informed that this was intended for one young man. As Claude said, when the mentioned young man came, he refused to enter his house. Then I told Claude, listen, I have a suitcase with this damn money and I'm not going to go out into the street with this suitcase, so if you refuse, then I will convey your words to Mr. Mogilevich, and let him take his back a suitcase with millions. I personally don't care. Only after this the young man entered the house and took the suitcase with the money. After the elections, Claude learned that the young man was Viktor Orban. Other people who regularly collected their envelope included then Hauser Laszlo, then head of the organized crime department of the Budapest police, Sándor István, and Jusz Laszlo, an influential person in the media. For insurance, the transfer of money in Dietmar's house to Claude was filmed by a hidden camera, videotaped were transferred to Mogilevich. In addition, American journalists have repeatedly argued in their reports that many in America are afraid of Mogilevich, since his comrades are included in U.S. political circles, and even, according to some reports, have a certain influence on the politics of Congress. To understand the magnitude of the figure of the Russian mafia, it is enough to mention that one of Mogilevich's lawyers was none other than William Sessions, the former director of the FBI. In addition, U.S. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse claims that it was Mogilevich who entrusted his people with rescuing Donald Trump from bankruptcy in 2004 and did this on behalf of Putin, who hoped that Trump would be useful in the future. On April 24, 2003, a Pennsylvania court accused Semyon Mogilevich in absentia of racketeering, fraud, money laundering, falsifying financial statements and a number of other crimes. The FBI even included him on its 10 most wanted list. It is worth noting separately that at that time this top 10 was headed by terrorist number 1 Osama bin Laden. His deputy Ayman Zawahiri was second, and the father of the Russian mafia Mogilevich took an honorable third place. Finally, it should be noted that at the moment no one can say where exactly the elusive Don Simeon is. According to one information, he completely moved to Israel for permanent residence. According to other sources, Mogilevich changed his last name and appearance and lives in a mansion near Moscow, where alibi breeds for his soul. but we can say with confidence that even in their old age, the bosses of Russian organized crime are haunted by Western intelligence services. And the human rights organization Global Witness recently confirmed this, calling Majlevich the most dangerous leader of organized crime in the world.